So we return to Bardach. One of the things you'll notice is that parts 2 and 3 of Bardach, in a sense, are supplementary when it comes to the goal of writing a successful paper. Part 1 of Bardach is very critical for figuring out how we're going to organize and lay out a paper. It gives depth and understanding to the 5 stages of policy making or other ways you think of to organize policy analysis. However, to the broader goal of being a policy analyst, to having a career in policy analysis, to understanding what we're trying to do, parts 2 and part 3 are actually pretty critical. So you should hang on to this book, but also as you read, you should try to figure out how some of the ideas in parts 2 and 3 can help turn you from being a student of policy analysis in one course to being a policy analyst and perhaps having a career in this field. Eventually, what you're going to do, what you're going to become, is the person that can be relied upon to gather and systematize information and then deliver that information to people who make decisions. People who make policy decisions often aren't there because they're the very best decision makers, but rather they tend to be the people who are most able to organize and to excite people on behalf of a cause. You know, they are fundraisers and they're good spokesmen, but perhaps what they aren't is people who gather information and in a professional way go from problem to solution. So this note, we have this photo of people in a room discussing a problem. I can't quite make out what that problem is, but it says as you progress in your career, one of the most important skills will be the efficient gathering and disseminating of information. We tried to just give you a little taste of that with the easy question assignment. If you're not looking to gather and quickly turn it around information, perhaps policy analysis is not the career for you. But at the same time, if you just like to keep working at a problem until you come to that solution that can fix problems and save people, well, then here you are. You're in the right place. So how do we assemble evidence? One thing we should think about is starting with what we know. There may be many, many things, and we should always assume that we don't know most of what we need to know. But we might have a line on some of the information. We might think about, more than thinking about our answer, maybe we should think about where can we locate relevant sources. One of the things you'll learn being in a place like Kennesaw State, you'll learn how to use things like JSTOR and ProQuest. You'll learn to talk to and network with people. Second question, how can you gain access to sources? Many of you haven't really thought about this yet. You think of it as almost cheating to ask somebody who might know what the answer is. But in the end, this is what all professionals do. They all know somebody who is an expert in some area that they need to go to rather than doing all of the research themselves. How can you use background information as leverage? Now, sometimes what this means is how can you take the knowledge of something and turn it into more knowledge? It can also mean how can you find people with whom you can trade information? 4, how can you protect your political credibility? And I think a lot of us ought to think about this, right, as we're working through and trying to come up with solutions to our policy problems. If we pronounce a decision before we have evidence, It might make us look bad. It might make us look like we're the kind of people who aren't doing policy analysis, that what we're really doing is just advocating for a preconceived notion. That doesn't really give us any value added over the average person in the street. There's an awful lot of people who have a take on any particular policy problem. What we hopefully have is a thoughtful and reasoned analysis that can explain why what we believe is actually the correct answer for the public. And what direct knowledge do you bring to your research? I think a lot of us will probably end up working in fields where we have some expertise other than that we've learned how to do policy analysis in 1 or 2 or 5 or an entire program of like master's level, how to do policy analysis. Instead, maybe what we bring is an expertise in some type of state and local government, or in some field, cement mixing, or some such. Or perhaps we have developed an expertise in something like climate change, or police relations, or something that actually interests us above and apart from its policy analysis implications. But we shouldn't step away from that. Instead, we need to use this as a resource in our future work. And the book suggests to you that you write yourself a memo about what you know and what you need to find. So I would suggest that all of you do this as you write your paper. Right now, go and say, what is it that would make my paper better if only I knew the answer to the question? And try to give yourself 8, 10, 12 action items that, maybe you can't find everything, but whatever you can find, whether they're particular facts or whether they're the point of view for the people who have suggested an alternative that's not yours, something that is going to give your paper extra punch. And as you go on in your career, something that's going to make and add professionalism and credibility to any research you ever do. Now, in this course, you're going to be able to get away, in many cases, with using secondhand information. This is not to say non-researched information. This is not to say information that is not of high caliber. If you cite a source when there's an obvious better source, particularly what about the professional source that the magazine article that you're citing or the journal article you're citing actually drew its information from? I might say, well, why am I getting this third hand when I could get it second hand? Why am I reading what the AJC says when they reference a Department of Justice report? Why am I not reading the Department of Justice report, or at least your take on that, rather than your take on the AJC article that was a take on the Justice Department source? But as you build your career, you're going to be expected to develop sources of firsthand information. Somebody that actually created the Department of Justice report, or the Census Bureau report, or the GBI report. And so when you think about this, think about where you can find sources of information. Obviously, if your paper has a first-hand source, that is going to be of so high quality that it's going to be impressive. Well, people can lead to documents, right? You can ask people in the know who maybe don't want to be interviewed by you for a college paper, or for that matter, don't want to be cited in a government report, they might still guide you to documents that could help you with your paper or with your report. Those documents could lead to other documents, and those documents could lead to individuals who might help you with this process. I should have created a wheel here to show you that, people lead to documents, documents lead to documents, and then documents lead to people. Heck, people can lead to people. Maybe I should have put that there, but maybe that goes without saying. The closer your information is to its source, the higher caliber it is. And at some point, people are going to say, well, why am I asking you? I could have looked that up. And as a professional, you're going to want to say, well, no, you probably couldn't have looked that up because I'm synthesizing information from two people who might never have even talked to you. People lead their lives with purpose. People do things because they're seeking outcomes. You shouldn't assume that you are the only person with a point of view. When somebody provides you information, or when somebody gives you documents or suggests to you things to read, they're seeking to influence your decision making. They're seeking to cause you to write your paper, your report, your analysis in a way that is going to most benefit them. If you are the person who is looking at the ways for Atlanta to reopen the zoo, then the person who's giving you this information has some purpose in mind. Now, it might be totally and completely altruistic. They might say, hey, I'm doing this because I don't want people to get sick. But I think that a little bit of reasonable skepticism should come to mind when somebody tells you something. When somebody gives you any piece of information, understand that they are not doing it for the same exact reason that you are doing it. That they are not giving it to you for the same reason that you are seeking it. Therefore, you should seek multiple sources of information. Seek evidence to supplement and confirm anything that's claimed. And evaluate both the quality of the source and the value of what evidence you receive. So for instance, if you are reading the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and they tell you something about the election, or they tell you something about the economy, or they tell you something about coronavirus, understand that they have a point of view. And if it is fair for you to say, wait a second, let's look at their sources and see whether I would have drawn the same conclusions. This next slide looks at gaining access and conducting a policy research interview. You should look in the book for more detail about this. Truth be told, most of the research that I've ever done has used documentary sources. One of the things that's really interesting about conducting an interview, however, is that you are not alone in guiding the interview. Sometimes the information that you receive is not exactly what you were seeking because the person that you're talking to is not trying to give you what you want. Instead, they're trying to give you what they want you to hear. And your goals need to be set out clearly before the interview ever starts. And the ability to steer and energize meetings, that's not really a strong suit of mine, I'll tell you. But I will tell you that if you don't have a plan for how your interview is going to go, then in the end, you're apt to not get the information that you seek. And this is one of the most important skills that you can learn. And I strongly recommend that you look through the Bardach book. And I strongly recommend that if ever you're in a position to conduct an interview, to have practiced it before you sit down and try to conduct it. You won't regret it. Part 3 talks about policy problems as institutional design problems. One of the interesting things that policy analysis should teach you is that things tend to not just happen. That when institutions are designed, they tend to lead to outcomes. Recall, try to reference back to when we were talking about institutionalism earlier in the course, and when you think about the outcomes that you receive, they're not always exactly what the individuals who are involved in the decision would have come up with if they had belonged to another institution. But more than that, when you're trying to come up with an outcome and you come up with a desired plan of action, rather than just focusing on this is what should be done, instead, perhaps, the most effective thing to do is to design an institution, an ongoing set of systems, values, enforcement mechanisms, and rules that will guide policy in the future toward the outcome that you're seeking. And this is a concept that Bardach brings to us here in Part 3. So if we're going to design a system, what are we trying to do? Well, Bardach says that 1, the system designer works to create a system that creates and perpetuates a desired outcome. We don't just want to set the rules and then walk away. Rather, we want to set up a system that continues to perpetuate itself going forward. It's like the choice of, you see with SpaceX, and they're building their rocket, right? And part of the main innovation that SpaceX is working on is that they're launching rockets that then part of the rocket will come back down and land, and they'll be able to recover it and reuse that rocket for future launches. Well, this will save them a lot of money, and it's part of their plan for, going into outer space. But if we think of this as a metaphor, what are we doing when we implement a policy? We don't want that implementation to fall apart once we've taken our eyes off of it. Remember, Downsian mobilization suggests to us that we're going to stop paying attention. And when we do stop paying attention, we can't have the system just end. And 2, the system designer needs to find a political path to achieve the adoption of the system. You can't, you need ongoing support for the system that you have implemented. First, the institution needs to try to accomplish what it was designed to do, but you also need the political support to continue this process. Even when people are no longer paying attention to your original problem, if you don't have an ongoing awareness of the need to perpetuate the system, politicians who are willing to just do the slight little tweaks to help the system carry forward, it is also going to fall apart. So I say here, note there's a strong similarity between what Bardach says and Kingdon's windows of opportunity, with the major difference being that Bardach provides a sense that the system designer is creating an opportunity. The system designer is causing the politics and the alternative and the problem to join together in a window of opportunity, rather than just waiting for this to happen randomly. And maybe this brings us back to Stone, right? Stone talks about goals and problems, solutions, politics. You know, we don't have a lot to think about this week, but we do have this paper hanging over our heads whose deadline is rapidly approaching. And as we consider Bardach, we should consider what the system designer is doing, but the system designer is acting with purpose, the purpose-driven life of the policy analyst, right? And so we're moving away from saying that preferences just are. Munger says that in rational choice models, preferences are assumed. But Stone recognizes, and perhaps we should recognize, that preferences are molded and created. And so if we're going to unify these two concepts, we have to say that policy analysis and showing a rational basis for a decision needs to somehow be linked to a recognition that what a policy analyst is doing is justifying an outcome that they favor, or that you're paid to say you favor, because ultimately people don't just dedicate their lives to working in a field where they don't care what the outcome is. And maybe I'm trying to manipulate you a little bit. Maybe with the Stone book report coming up in just a couple days, I'm really wanting you to take a little bit of time and try to see how the work that you've done in this semester so far works well with Stone, and hopefully you can draw some connections that will help you write a more powerful paper. I think the Stone book report can be informed by Bardach, but I certainly hope that your policy analysis paper at the end of the semester is informed by policy paradox. So consider how policy paradox can strengthen your policy analysis paper, but also take a moment and consider how what you've learned elsewhere can inform the book report that you're expected to write in the next couple days. So good luck. I'll cut off now, and you will have plenty of extra time to make sure that you write the very best paper you can.